So we're still in the season of Christmas, right? Christmas is 12 days long. Christmas is 12 days long. We are still in the season of Christmas. We still have our Advent wreath and all of our decorations up. And so we still get to hear about the Christmas story for a little bit. And our Bible story for today is a very well-known Bible story. And I've noticed with well-known Bible stories that we just kind of skip over them. We skim over them. We listen to them and then we move on because we've already heard it, so there's nothing left to learn. And I've been working my way, kind of coming over this essay. I'll talk about it later in my sermon for about a year and a half now. And it's kind of given me a new perspective on this very classic, well-known story that I want to share with you all today. And this is the story, it's from the Gospel of Matthew, and it's about what happened to Jesus and his parents and their community in the first couple years of Jesus' life. Out of respect for the gospel, please stand.
In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, 'And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel.'" Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child. And when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there, ahead of them, went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. Now after they had left, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother by night, and went to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." When Herod saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, he was infuriated, and he sent and killed all the children in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had learned from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled because they are no more.
The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Please be seated. So, the story goes that these astrologer, tarot card reading types, magicians from the east, had known of a star that would rise, which would announce the new king of the Jews, the Messiah. When these magi observed the star, they headed out following it. And as they were following the star, they came upon the city of Jerusalem, where the current king lived, a man named King Herod. Herod was a puppet king for the Roman government. He wasn't a Jew himself. He also wasn't Roman, but he ruled over the Jewish districts, basically. And so they swing in, these magicians, they swing in to see Herod, and they were like, "Hey, do you know where the new king is? We saw the star." And Herod's like, new king? There's a new king, huh? Who is this new king that you speak of? You know what? Continue on your journey, keep going on your quest, and after you find the new king, why don't you come on back and tell me where the new king is, so that so I can pay the new king homage. Herod didn't want a new king. Herod had plans on killing the baby. So Herod calls together the Pharisees, the Sadducees, his own sages, his own little magical cohort, and says, where is this child supposed to be born? What do we know? What do we know, people? And they say, well, the prophet said Bethlehem. So the magicians travel on. They find Jesus. They share their gifts. And they go home on a different road, because a dream told them not to stop back by Herod. And when Herod realizes that he has been duped and he will not be finding the specific baby who he planned to kill, he went for a less targeted approach, a mass killing. Herod orders all of the babies born in or near the districts of Bethlehem who are under the age of 2 to be slaughtered. Joseph has a dream where the angel of the Lord tells him to take the baby and the baby's mother to Egypt immediately. Immediately. Not next week, not even tomorrow. Take them immediately, because Herod's men are coming for Jesus right now. Joseph takes them under the cover of nighttime to become refugees in Egypt. And they stay there until Joseph has another dream, instructing them not to return to Bethlehem, but to settle in Nazareth in the Galilee region. This story, the story of the slaughter of the innocents and the flight to Egypt, is one that we hear during the Christmas season in church. And as I was saying earlier, I've spent the last year and a half combing over an essay by theologian Amy Barber that talks about these first couple chapters of the Gospel of Matthew. And I have to say, I have found myself shaken to the core by this story in a way that I hadn't before. I've heard this story so many times. I just wonder if I was ever really paying attention. I have a rule when it comes to preaching that I don't shy away from difficult texts or topics. In fact, I think that Sunday morning, Saturday evening, worship time is the place where we should ask the hard questions and do it together. And so today's topic is, I went for the hard one. I don't know what to tell you. But we're going to do it together. We're going to be brave together. Because I want to talk about these innocents. I want to talk about these babies in Bethlehem. I want to talk about the parents who didn't get a vision to take their babies far away, and who instead had to suffer under the hand of Rome. King Herod the Great was a puppet king. His sons would rule after him, but he earned his throne through military conquest, a 3-year military conquest that earned him the right to become the king over the Jewish districts. And so because he kind of achieved this through military conquest, he was always looking over his shoulder, waiting for the coup, right, that would come and overthrow him. He was very afraid of losing power. And being this kind of king in Jerusalem would mean that he would have access to the Roman military as well. Now, the infrastructure of the Roman military was outstanding. Very, very few militaries on this entire planet and throughout human history have been able to pull off what the Roman military could. And so when the decree went out that Herod sent, it would not have taken long to execute. When we think of the Roman army, we often just think of the centurions. And centurions were more like generals, maybe a little bit below where a general was. They could read and write. They were allowed to be part of the political system. But the average soldiers were actually parts of cohorts and legions. And those were ruled over by centurions. And a cohort or a legion had anywhere from 50 to 600 people in it. And they'd be scattered kind of throughout the land. So if you needed the army there right now, you could just contact like a centurion in that neighborhood, in that area, and they could bring together their cohort or their legion in order to execute the orders. So the order went out quickly, and it would have been executed quickly. But I want us to stop and think about what this means and how it would play out. There is a very real chance that these soldiers, that this local law enforcement knew the families, knew the babies, or at least the parents of the babies that they were ordered to execute. This is not just traumatizing for the families who lost children, y'all, but also on the men who were ordered to execute these orders. Knowing that if they didn't, it would be them, and it would be their families. There wasn't like dishonorable discharge, okay? Bethlehem and its surrounding districts, y'all, is small. This is not St. Louis. You're talking about a small town. Everybody knew everybody. The kind of trauma that the entire community experienced together. I mean, it's something I just hadn't thought about. I read in a commentary that they looked at like census numbers and tried to guess the average population of Bethlehem and what that would mean for these babies. And so the head count was probably somewhere around 20 children under the age of 2. And all because King Herod felt threatened, because he was filled with fear. I had never taken into consideration the terror and horror of what had taken place in this story. As Amy Barber says in her essay, the many are not saved for the one. Even as the biblical text already works to figure Jesus as the one sacrificed for the many, many are sacrificed for Jesus. How often have I heard that Christ died for everyone? And yet we very rarely consider those who have died for Christ. I mean, the Christian martyrs, the grown people who chose so. You know, we talk about them. It's kind of more of a Catholic thing, but we believe in them. And we do know that there are Christians all around this planet who are worshiping in nations where it's illegal, where even if they're caught with a Bible, it could mean death for them. So there are people who have historically, died for Christ, but I don't think we keep these babies at the top of our list. We think of the trauma and we talk about the trauma that Christ experienced on the cross, but we don't often think about the trauma of those soldiers or the families. And why were these parents and these people not given a divine dream from God telling them to protect their families and to go on the run? It's not fair. I've been thinking about why in the past, why this story didn't shake me up the same way as it does now. And this is the best answer I can come up with. I don't think I took seriously or even understood the injustice of the story until now. I think that there's a very important relationship between how we can talk about the salvation of God and how desperately we need to be saved. But the depth of that understanding, I think, is very much so related to the depth of the understanding of the suffering of the world and why we need to be saved. As Christians, we believe that the birth of this baby, that when God became incarnate in the world, that this was and is the very most important thing that has happened in human history. Because we believe that it's through Jesus that the world, that we as a people collectively and as individuals can experience forgiveness, redemption, justice, and salvation. There's a chance I just didn't understand that deep need for forgiveness, for justice, for redemption, for salvation, that I didn't comprehend the depth of the need because I didn't comprehend the depth of the suffering of those people. I've lived a pretty sterile and privileged life. I don't know what it's like to live in a war-ridden country, to be an occupied people. We cannot begin to comprehend the importance or the strength or the depth of what salvation can mean, what redemption can mean for the world until we take seriously, equally serious, the suffering of the world, the parts which need that redemption, the parts which need to be saved, until we take seriously just how unjust some things are in this world. Basically, I think I didn't take seriously the suffering of the world that Jesus lived in. And so I wasn't able to compare it to the world I live in now. See, before Jesus was born, everyone was talking about the coming Messiah. And people had different ideas on what that was going to look like. But the main idea was this, that a man would descend down from the heavens on a cloud, which I know sounds weird, but we do have other stories of like ascension and descension, like in the Bible, right? So a man would come descending down from the heavens with a military, and they would conquer Rome, and then that man, the Messiah, would sit on a throne. And there's some issues with this, but the one that I think pertains to our sermon has to do with someone just appearing in the world and not being born into and being raised in the world. He wasn't, like, if it's this Messiah that descends down, he remains like untouched, unindicted to the suffering of the world. Like, it's not something he had to experience, right? He could just show up, do his thing, and it's over. In this view, God incarnate, the Messiah, would remain untouched, unindicted by the sin of this world. But that's not the God we believe in. What Christ, what the triune God offers us is so much better than that. You know, we Christians, we believe that Jesus was fully divine. Yes. We also believe that Jesus was fully human. And fully human has a lot of baggage with it, y'all. Fully human is not always easy. Fully human is messy. We cannot claim that God was fully human and yet wouldn't be affected by or touched by, webbed into, roped into, woven into the corporate sin of the world. Even as a baby. There's no fully human that isn't, actually fully human. With all the stuff that we are and that we go through. Our God didn't descend from the heavens as a grown man. He was born like all other fully human babies are born. And I'm sorry, you just can't be born into this world and expect that you're not going to be born into the web of sin and systems and militarization and violence and politics. No one can. It's part of being human. We are all affected by these things. But this is what's so amazing and set apart about the Christian story. That God comes to us like this. God knows what it means to be roped into and webbed into these tragedies that we can't escape from. God didn't try to escape from it either. God took all of that on. God took on flesh. God took on these systems. God was part of it. God gets it. God takes so seriously the suffering of the world that God lived it too. God lived it too. There's nowhere that God doesn't go, even and especially in our deepest and communal personal tragedies. God enters into the mess, the real, honest mess of what it means to be a person living in the world. Nadia Bolz-Weber, when reflecting on this Bible text, says the following. The story of Herod, an infanticide, reveals a God who's entered our world as it actually exists and not the world we often wish that it would be. God's love is too pure to enter into a world that does not exist. Even though this is often how we treat Jesus, like we're trying to shelter him from reality. We often behave as though Jesus is only interested in saving and loving a romanticized version of ourselves or an idealized version of our mess of a world. And so we offer to him a version of our best selves. She goes on. With our Sunday school shoes on, we sing songs about kings and drummers at his birth, perhaps so we can escape the Herod in ourselves and in the world around us. Of course, there are many ways of pretending that things ain't broken ourselves and in the world, but escapist religion is a classic option, and churches have seemed to turn into places where we have endless opportunities to pretend that everything is fine. But church was never meant to be a place for escapism. It can and should be a place where we dive right into difficult truths. I love what she said there. She wrote that. It's part of a chapter she wrote comparing this Bible story to the children who died at Sandy Hook. A very, very appropriate connection. My beloved community, I don't want to be part of an escapist religion. I don't want to bring half of who I am here on Sunday mornings. I'm tired. My kids were up late. I'm not feeling great. I don't want to have to pretend with you. And I don't want any of you to have to pretend either. I want you to be able to bring all of who you are into this space without fear, knowing that you are loved by this community and by God. I don't want any of us to think that only some people or some parts of ourselves are worthy of redemption. I don't want to forget about the people who suffer. I don't want to forget about the kids who suffered in this story. I don't want to ignore injustice. I don't want to be part of a movement that's only for some. I want to know that God will redeem and resurrect and save somehow, in some way, in some future, and even right now. Those babies, their parents, those soldiers, their families. I want to be part of a religion that invites all of them to the same table to share one sacred meal, no matter what they have done or what was done to them. I want a place where tarot card reading magicians, dirty shepherds, Roman centurions, and the oppressed parts of ourselves and our community are welcomed. Where we can all come and praise God together and remind each other that this is our good news. I want a place where an unwed pregnant teenager can sing songs of future justice and hope while in a dire situation. Where we hear the voices of the prophets and are still filled with hope thousands of years later. My beloved, we are known. We are known by God. And we are loved by God in the midst of the mess. And God knows how difficult this world can be, how messy this world can be, because God lived it. As we move into a new year, I have been reflecting on the idea of what it means to follow the King of Peace and not the kings of fear. Was my sermon title. It makes for a very catchy sermon title. It looks very good on paper. It is very hard to live into. What does it mean to follow the King of Peace and not the kings of fear? It's a nice thought. It's hard to live by. Sometimes the voice of Herod is more like an internal voice, you know? And it gets to rule over me. And I find myself afraid. I know it could be like that for me often. But I also know that there are times when I remember the good news of Jesus, the good news of God. And I remember the King that I claim to follow, the one that I know, the one I know to reign as systems rise and fall. It's the voice I listen for in the darkness. It's a light that shines so bright that it doesn't deny the suffering of the world, but pierces through it, illuminates it until redemption can take place. The Jesus that reminds me that there is no king higher, and that nothing can keep God from saving us. Nothing. Merry Christmas. Amen.